speed kills all deals. Because when we rush the process, we miss the context. And in long lead capital sales, complex deals, context is everything. When we sat in front of the decision makers and the money interests, all they cared about was that we had delivered some crate full of technology onto their dock on this day, not a day earlier, because that would cost them, and certainly not a day later, because they had borrowed about $500 million to make sure that this project moved forward. I learned the phrase meaningful next step. The most meaningful next step, obviously, is getting the purchase order, but there might be 20 or 30 meaningful next steps to get to that purchase order. And any one of those steps, if you try to step over, you're going to kill the deal.
Welcome to Building Your Sales Engine. I'm your host, Mark McGraw. Hi, everybody. Welcome back to Building Your Sales Engine with Mark McGraw. I am your host. And today I sit down with Brian Hayes. Brian is a lifetime learner, and I tell you what, a guy that has spent a ton of time around long sales cycle deals, very complex sales, things that require connecting meeting after meeting after meeting and multiple people and multiple millions of dollars and multiple decision makers and influencers. I mean, he has really mastered this craft and all around great guy. So we dive into how do you manage and navigate long sales cycles and do that to the best of our ability. And I share a note or two. I did this for 16 years myself as well. So I think you'll get a lot out of this episode for sure if you are in a long sales cycle situation. Now, be sure, help us out if you would. Like and subscribe to this podcast. It means the world to us. We want to have more and more folks aware of what goes on, and it just makes such a big difference for us if you would do that for us. Much appreciated. Let's dive into the episode with Brian Hayes. Everybody, welcome to Building Your Sales Engine. I am here today with my longtime friend and client, all-around great guy, Mr. Brian Hayes. Brian, welcome to our podcast, Building Your Sales Engine, sir.
Good afternoon, Mark. I know you've asked me to join you, and it's been a long time in the making, so I really appreciate you having me on. Although it's virtual and I wanted to be with you, we just couldn't make that happen, but hopefully everybody will understand.
We are still face-to-face regardless.
And I have to say you're looking well.
Thank you. Thank you. Another session we'll do bonding and rapport and getting people to like you. So today's topic we're going to work on. I love this topic. The topic is how do you navigate longer sales cycles? I just personally, I came out of a business where it was, 2 to 3 years to go get a sale was not uncommon. And you are at least that. So we're going to talk about like the best practices, what to do, what not to do, some of the wonderful things that you've done over the years. Brian, let's start here. Tell us about yourself, your background, and a little bit about Brian Hayes, and then let's dive into the topic here of navigating longer sales cycles.
Thanks, Mark. So I'm the Vice President of Sales and Marketing for GPA, and GPA is Global Process Automation. So we were started by an international automation consultant, and this was many years ago. And but since then, I when people say, "What's your elevator pitch?" We're the number one system integrator for automation in North America, and so we predominantly participate. Paper mills is a third of our business. Mining, minerals is a big part of our business. Chemicals. So we do a lot of system integration of all those things that computers and lights that turn machines off and on and make sure that our clients meet production and quality.
And in this business and previous businesses that you've been involved in, this is not the kind of world where somebody calls you up and says, "Can I have system integration by noon today?" I mean, it's a long, when you're working on, let's say, a paper mill, or in my case, it was electronics manufacturing facilities, it takes a while for all that stuff to come together and to get laid out. Therefore, the sales cycle becomes longer, and it becomes significant. There's a lot of moving parts in that process. Brian, how long typically are the sales cycles in the businesses that you've been a part of?
Yeah. So, first of all, when you talk about the capital sales cycle, that immediately means that many of the companies you're dealing with are Fortune 500 or large capital companies. They're industrial, they're industries, they're manufacturing, they're consumer products. They're taking ore out of the ground, they're chopping up trees into little bits and bytes to be pressed and delivered in boxes for your Amazon delivery. And these large companies, and they're getting larger because they have to make those investments so that the end products are less and less cost to the consumer. They're all large capital companies, and means that they have to go through a capital buying cycle. So not only do you have the buyers sellers dance, I like to call it the buyers buying cycle, and that is they have to get a budget together, and sometimes that budget takes 3 to 6 months, and they have to get a scope together, and they have to get a delivery, and then that has to go through their buying process of justification. And if it's large, and many of the projects that me and my companies have worked on have been very large projects, it has to go up to the board for approval. And if you know how boards are, they meet once a year, and usually the big board meeting is in January. So right then you start at 6 to 8 months, and you're probably a year and a half or even 2 years into the project before you hear whether the project is a go. And then now you start to worry if your company is on the get.
Yeah. And so, what I hear in there are a few things. Number one is, what if the project actually doesn't get funded by the board? Then you're another budget cycle away, potentially, till that comes back around. The other thing that happens is that with that sales cycle, once the budget's confirmed, that doesn't mean necessarily that you've won the sale. It just means that the first sale is there budget that's going to be spent. The second sale is it going to be spent with me? So,
That's right.
So let's talk about some of the there's lots of challenges with this. What are some of the things that you have found that have helped you, maybe even from a mindset point of view? Because I think that's a place to start. Is it takes a different mindset to be a seller like this. Any thoughts around that for what it takes from a just pure attitude mindset point of view?
You really have to go from the client's point of view. So it is, and that's what the Sandler selling system is really looking is developing your questions, and developing your questions in such a way where you uncover the most amount of information to help your client. And that process, it's a multi-engagement process. And now with Teams, it's helpful. It's more helpful. But many times, it's not uncommon that you might have 4, 6, or 8 face-to-faces in order to develop that initiative over a period of time.
So from a mindset point of view, you just got to be patient, for one. And I also hear you basically saying too, is that you got to be curious through the process in a big way.
You have to be curious. You have to have a strategy. Certainly you have to have a strategy, but it's this constant understanding of where the customer is in his buying process. And if someone asks me, what is the number one, and I don't think there can be a number one, but let's just say what's the number one problem with salespeople today is we don't speak the client's language. We think they understand because they're in their business. We think they understand our business, and they don't. And technology is moving so quickly that we're getting new technologies and new 3-letter acronyms all the other day. And I said to somebody something about having embedded AI and ML. Well, AI, everybody knows, is artificial intelligence, but they stopped and paused and said, "What's ML?" And I said, "Well, that's machine learning." And they said, "Well, what's machine learning?" And I went, "Wow!" I mean, that I have to be reminded that here I'm talking to somebody who's, quote, in this business, and not only in their domain business of manufacturing, but also in the automation and digitalization space. And I just threw out another fat word called digitalization, and we can define that. But you know, there you can't take anything for granted. You really have to walk through a person. And you know, we one of the things that one of the sayings is that speed kills all deals, and I love that. And I say that at least once a week to my team. But there's also a hidden cost to selling too fast, because when we rush the process, we miss the context. And in long lead capital sales, complex deals, context is everything. Where are they in their buying process? Who are you talking to? At what level? Why are they saying that the way they're saying that now? The complications grow very quickly.
Yeah, and you mentioned a minute ago. I see two things coming together here with this. I mean, people normally hear the phrase "time kills deals," and you just said "speed kills deals." Brian, is that simply because we get too impatient? We stop asking enough of the right questions, and I love the context point as well. But is that what happens, that when you see people where speed kills, that they're just moving too fast?
Yeah, I mean, that's exactly it. If you're truly in tune with your client's buying cycle, you will know the appropriate time to ask certain questions and be ready to say, if I ask the question this way and they answer it that way, what does that mean? But if they pivot and answer it a different way, what does that mean? You can start being anticipatory. One of the things that we always do when we develop our call on the customers is 3 questions you want to ask and 3 questions you think you're going to be asked. And then you gamify that. You say, okay, if they're going to ask me these questions, why are they asking me these questions? And so then you start to say, okay, well, they're asking me because this reason. Well, maybe it was another reason. So you start going through all those permutations. So you really start to have an idea of the context for why they're asking the questions in that way. And a lot of times as sales managers, we focus on when are you going to close that deal by this date. So when I worked for a large, public company, driven by quarterly profits, what are you going to close by the end of the quarter? Every quarter, you knew that question was coming, and my response would be, at what point do you want me to speed this deal through, misunderstand the context of the deal, and perhaps jeopardize the deal? Is really what it comes down to.
Yeah. Yeah, because I think you make a good point, and that is speed can kill a deal. Time can kill a deal too, but in longer sales cycles, you want to keep things moving. But sometimes people want them to move. As a seller, you want it to move a lot faster than what the buyer wants to move it at. And there's things that people can do to accelerate a sales process for sure. But you're not going to take a 2-year sales process likely and turn it into a 2-week sales process. I mean, it's not going to be dramatic. It might change in shape a little bit, but it's not going to make a huge difference in the grand scheme of things. So it's more important to get it closed than it is to try to close it fast.
Well, think of it this way: from the client's, the buying cycle, that point of view, when the board approves the project, and if it seeks board approval or even maybe site approval, but it goes to the top manager at that site, as soon as they approve it, time starts ticking for them. It's how fast can you get this implemented? So up until that point, they have all the time in the world. They're trying to understand, are they getting the best quality, the best deal? It's the most suitability for use, this type of thing. But once it's approved by corporate, by the decision makers or the money lenders, it's as fast as
Mm.
you can implement. I mean, I've been involved in projects where the decision makers say every day that this project is delayed by any one of our major sub suppliers, that's hundreds of thousands of dollars every day. So every sub supplier going into that major capital project is under the gun for delivering a solution at the time they committed to.
Yeah, and if as a seller, I mean that that's certainly a way to help get something accelerated as best you can, is to identify what is the cost of delay, what is the cost of inaction on a project. If it's $100,000 a day and your buyer's telling you that, and it is an interesting thing to make sure that everybody knows that, because if that's a substantial amount of money to them, and for some people it is, and some people it isn't. But if they convince you that $100,000 a day is a substantial investment that they're losing out on, that could accelerate a deal. So quantifying what the cost of inaction is can be a tool that's used to be able to accelerate longer deals. Fair, or any comments to it?
No, you're exactly right. I once flew to Italy for some negotiations in terms and conditions, and we had uh, did some wargaming and said, what if they ask for this? How do we respond? What if they ask for that? How to respond to this? And we went through all that. When we sat in front of the decision makers and the money interests, the only thing they cared about was delivery by a certain date.
Hmm.
We talked about interoperability, we talked about upgrades, we talked about service level agreements, we talked about 100 different things, and none of that was important to this company. All they cared about was that we had delivered some crate full of technology onto their dock on this date, not a
Hmm.
day earlier, because that would cost them, and certainly not a day later, because they had borrowed about $500 million to make sure that this project moved forward. So that was what they cared about, and we had to regroup and go back to the hotel and talk with our legal and say, how do we develop a T's and C's which meet all of their requirements for delivery?
Yeah, and by the way, isn't it true that you can prepare for something like over and over and over? I always laugh. I said, if you're afraid somebody's going to ask you a question in a meeting, just prepare for it, and they won't ask. I do not know why that is, but there's truth to that. And at the same time, if you don't prepare, you don't go in confident, and that starts to show up and seep through the meeting as well. So for sure, everybody ought to be thinking about, what are the three questions that they need to ask? What are the three things that they need, that they think they might be asked? And I think a key thing that you just said, that has helped me think strategically in long sales deals, which I've been a part of most of my life, and that is playing what if. Okay. And so what I hear you saying in there is, what if they ask us about X? How are we going to respond? What if they ask about why? I think, to me, playing what if and almost like war game scenarios in your mind, both on the tactical point of view when you think about a large account, and how we're going to answer questions in a meeting, but also in the strategic method. Like, what if I go around this person to their boss? What's likely to happen? Is it going to be good? Is it going to be bad? Does it matter? But playing the what if game a lot when you're doing long sales cycle accounts, to me, man, it's been one of the best things on my side. I hear you doing it as well. Are there tools or ideas around there that you have used as well, Brian?
No, I mean, you're exactly right. It's it's so much, and I have to give um, kudos to Sandler and to your training especially, and that is, it is so much hand to hand combat. It is so much at the spur of the moment, saying at the right time, wait a minute, this project sounds a little bit bigger than I was thinking when I first walked in here. When it's a project of this size, who else is involved?
Mm.
And that key question right there can open up uh, a longer conversation in front of your prospect, can open up the doors, who's down the hallway, can open up the doors to corporate, can open up the doors to consultants. And, and then when you follow it up with a question is, a lot of times when I'm working on a project like this, sometimes we have outside interests. We have a owner's engineer who's advising us. Is that the case here?
Hmm.
Or,
yeah, well, it's a great question to go at it that way. Please.
Yeah. And so when you've have been through a few of these and you get burned, hopefully you don't have too many scars, but you start to see that you haven't identified all the stakeholders. Then you start to realize when you take a sales training and it says achieving stakeholders, a stakeholder alliance, you go, I'm going to join that because I want to hear how everybody else has done that. But really, it comes down to the old, the training methods that are being taught, and that is, who else is involved, and asking questions. Well, you're not the only one making these decisions, are you? And who has signatory authority, and who had this type of thing? Because in a lot of the projects that I've been involved with. A person may be a decision maker, but they're not the final ink on the paper.
Yeah.
And if you miss the ink on the paper, then you've missed a big opportunity to influence.
Yeah, and the other thing you run into with that too is that someone that might be a decision maker, they're a decision maker on who they're going to use, but as we said earlier, not if money is going to be spent. So potentially you have two decision makers there. One is we are going to make this investment. The other is who are we going to make this investment with? And you got to win all of these sales. It's not just one sale that you're making when you make a large capital sale. It's a whole bunch of little sales strung together over a long period of time. That's what makes the difference right there. And I think one other thing I'll throw out to this, at least that I've found, Brian, is from a mindset point of view, you've got to be comfortable with a lot of small wins. You got to feel good about a lot of small wins, because if you, in my days when I was selling, 16 years, I sold large capital equipment. If I was only happy on days that I got a sale, I'd be happy about 4 times a year. Okay. And so you gotta rely on other things to motivate you and these small wins throughout the transaction to keep your momentum and keep your morale up.
You're absolutely right. And it might have been either in a 2010 session with Sales Engine and Mark McGraw, or it could have been in another session in 2018. I learned the phrase "meaningful next step."
Mm-hmm.
And I use that term "meaningful next step" all the time, because the most meaningful next step obviously is getting the purchase order, but there might be 20 or 30 meaningful next steps to get to that purchase order, and any one of those steps, if you try to step over, you're going to kill the deal.
Yeah, it's the truth, and that's another place to play what if. So if somebody says to you, this is the next meaningful next step, okay, well, what if we get past that? What are the next things that are going to occur beyond that? And that's something I know you've done a lot of, and I've done a lot of, where you're mapping out the road to an order based upon a number of potential contingencies and potential forks or changes that occur through the process. And that what if question, again, plays a big role in that. Otherwise, here's what happens is you're handling things one at a time. And they give you insight on something, and then you got to go back to them and get the next step. And then it's back and forth and back and forth. That takes forever, as opposed to laying out a path to the PO using what if right from the outset. And I've just found that to be a really good tool. I see you smiling there. So,
Well, especially when you're there's a large difference between selling obsolescence replacements. They have something, they have to replace it. And a lot of my business has been done like that. They have to replace it. But when you're selling a value proposition, something they haven't done before, when it's a new technology, they're not quite sure what the end goal looks like, what that end purchase looks like. You have to project out past your next sales call and you have to project. You have to ask. You have to explain that to
Yeah.
them. Well, what happens if?
Yeah, and in some cases too, you're making me think it's almost like you're the Sherpa, you're the guide, because while they don't make these purchases all that often, and yet we make sales like this quite frequently. So we may not know exactly what their purchasing path looks like to the T, but we know what common purchasing paths look like. And to your point, I think you can be a really good advisor for someone by helping someone anticipate what a next step might be, even though they may not know because they haven't made a purchase like this in 7 years, or in some cases, in their entire career as an engineer, if you're selling through to an engineer. Is that fair to say?
Yeah, if in a 60-minute sales call or Teams meeting, or face to face, however, if you're not saying at least 3 to 4 times, help me understand. In other words, your business, help me understand the language that you use, because when we go to the decision makers and the moneyed interests, that we're using their language. So help me understand that. And that's help. And then saying, what if, and that's bringing the future to now. What happens if you decide that there's another technology out there that might compete? Or what happens if this project gets folded into another, or gets canceled, or whatever it is? So those two, the first 30 minutes should be help me understand, and then next 30 should be what ifs. And that's that might be a good a good training session.
That is a
Already in my
great one.
mind.
Yeah, I love it. I love it. I think it's spot on. The other thing you just did right there, that you see, Sandler so well. You just say things that it's like it just comes out of your mouth, and and some people might even miss it. You said something there that I think is worth going back and highlighting. You said, so when we take this to the board, or when we take this to your manager. So what you're doing right there, and this is again a tool that people can use throughout longer sales cycles, is guide people on what the next steps are and assume that you're going to do them, not in a salesy way, but it's just natural that you and I, Mr. and Mrs. Engineer, are going to take this over here to this department, and we're going to do it together. But you're guiding that process by almost assuming that you're going to do it together. Big mistake I see people make is they ask, well, can we get a meeting with, or they're asking Mother May I permission to go to another group or another department, as opposed to assuming that that's the right normal thing to do. And you just do it by course of course, this is what we do. And you just did that so naturally. I just had to highlight it because, it'd be easy for people to miss.
Well, I think your and my relationship started around 2010. If I could go back even before that, I had been working either in technical service or technical sales for about 15 years or so, by for a lot of European companies, where um, they their idea of selling was really product selling, right? We're going to teach you more about the product. We're going to teach you the phrases to say, and then you go out and sell it. And it was never about being a professional salesperson and really understanding the questions you should ask, the order of the questions you should ask, and what was more important that I learned under Sales Engine and Sandler is, who are you, right? Start working on the I. And that's an important part. So when I heard that, that was something that resonated with me. And after that, I said, well, gosh, maybe I don't know as much as I needed about selling. So I went on eBay and other sources and bought every Sandler CD and cassette tape I could find. And there weren't too many. People were holding on pretty tightly, but I found a few, and I was able to play those and listen to them, so that almost what David Sandler would say in his own voice became my voice. It was interesting how many times I heard it, and the next time I'd be on a call or talking to a customer, it would come out of my mouth like I had said it, the most wise thing in the world. And I just realized I was just listening to that in the parking lot coming in, and it just became part of me. So I think you always hear the fake it till you make it. I don't know if I believe in that, but I do believe that if you fall down to your training, and I think that I had trained so much in it that even in a call it a higher pressure situation, that just came out naturally. So one of my recommendations is someone said, how would you recommend being successful in this long sales cycle, complex capital environment? What would be? I'd say uh, when you're spending hours in the car, and I used to spend 6, 8, 10 hours between sales calls, it gives you a lot of time to listen to a lot of smart people.
Hmm. Yeah, and it's so funny you're making me laugh because I remember the first time you called me, and for everybody's sake that might be listening, Brian was in the back of a room of a half-day workshop years and years and years ago, 2010, I think you mentioned. And to be honest, there were a bunch of people in the room. I didn't know you or whatever, and you call me out of the blue years later and say that you had bought these cassettes and stuff like that, and all this old audio is like archives. You're dusting it off, blowing on the cassette tapes and all the stuff, the CDs, getting the dust off, and that you had listened to this stuff, and you were giving me things on that first call that I'm like, oh my God, you had 4 hours worth of Sandler live in front of with me years ago, but you've learned all of this stuff through additional means and audio and all of the other recordings. I was so impressed by that. It blew me away. I don't think I've ever met anybody quite as much as you as a student. And that's, I think, what you've got to be as a professional seller. You just got to be a student like yourself when you're going through this process. And I think in a capital sale too, one other thing too is, man, you got to be that much better but you don't get as many times at bat. You're not getting up there 10 times a day. It's just by the nature of it. So you better be that much more prepared when you do have that opportunity. Fair?
I remember every loss painfully. Because, I mean, not just back pocket, but I'm going to guess on some of the projects that my team and me have worked on together. And typically I was the tip of the spear. I would organize everything, but there was always a great team behind me. And it could take 6, 8, or 10 months. You were flying internationally. You were meeting at all levels. You were doing proof points at both the plant level, the mill level, the mine level. So you're getting buy-in from anywhere from floor level engineers and technicians all the way up to the C-suite. And when you spend that much time and effort on airplanes, many a times I wasn't able to take a flight home and get back to my home because we had to stay an extra day, or you thought you were going to take that last flight out, and we all know how that works. But you didn't get home to the next day, so you invest so much emotionally, and to find out you lost it, it has nothing to do with financially. It's always like, I spent so much time, I'm so emotionally invested it's tough, and I remember each one. And so one of the things that I learned from Sandler was to write it. I wrote down all my wins and all my losses. So I kept a sales diary, and I look back at it from time to time, my sales diary, and say, oh yeah, that's what happened. You remember the pain. My wife will tell me, you remember childbirth, you don't forget that. But that's how it feels like, if that's probably a bad comparison. But it's so painful, but you may forget the facts. And I would always write down, and that's one of the things that I learned, is that on the I side, improving the I side, I always wrote down where I screwed up, where I could improve, how I didn't ask the right question at the right time to the right person.
Well, by the way, that's how Sandler developed the Sandler selling system. Is he was in sales and he started to log why people wouldn't buy. And he said, well, if I'm not talking to the right decision maker, that's a reason why they're not buying. I need to make sure that I'm doing that and make that part of my system. If they have a problem, but they don't have money, I need to make sure I'm qualifying for budget and money. So every loss that he ever had, he just backed into how do I make sure that doesn't happen to me? And I just bring it up rather than waiting for it to happen to me. So, it's spot on. I love that. What a great lesson for everybody, too, is to keep a journal, keep a log of your wins and losses and why. I got a good friend of mine, John Rosso, and you've probably met John at one time or another, Brian. But John said in his first year of sales, he put Post-it notes up on a dream board, which was a nightmare board, really. And the Post-it note had the reason he lost the sale and how much it cost him in money in his pocket. And he said at the end of the year, he had $1 million worth of losses up on the board in front of him. And so he again works just like you to be able to identify what are the things I'm screwing up that I got to make sure that I don't do going forward. Brian, you brought up earlier, I want to make sure we cover two really additional important things before we wrap up. One of them is this, and that is, man, the importance of asking the who, what, why, where, when, and how questions in a long sale. And making sure you know who else is going to be involved and what's the time frame and what's the consequences of them missing a date that they've shared with you at one time or another, and what are the steps in the process that the organization's going to go through. I imagine you ask some or all of those questions. Order matters as well. Any thoughts as far as applying those to long sales cycles to make sure that we're just nailing this thing as much as possible?
There's nothing that beats preparation, right? I mean, if you're talking Eisenhower and D-Day planning, and he said, after we launch, just throw the planning manuals into the trash because it doesn't matter. And they said, why do it? And he said, the value's in the planning.
Yeah.
So, I've always had my team write pre-call reports. And that is what questions you would like to ask, what questions you think you're going to be asked, who's in the meeting, do the 3x3 matrix. That was one, who you're talking to, who's on either side of them, who's above them and who's below them, who do they report to and who reports to them. Walk away with that. Understand what business we're already doing with them, what's a share of wallet, what you could be doing with them. I mean, there's a whole pre-call report template, which if you bypass that, you don't even make the call, right? Another one I do is pre-mortems. And that is, what would happen if we miss this or this got killed, or, let's pretend we lost the order. And these are the reasons we lost the order. So we do a pre-mortem and say, wow, that exposes very quickly how you could lose an order. Again, misalignment or missing, not evaluating or talking to the not talking to the right person or helping them through the right evaluations. And I think I don't have any special tools for this other than an Excel spreadsheet or a Word document, or I started using OneNote only because it comes with every Microsoft computer, and it's easy to click on and it just opens up. You don't have to go searching for it. But I use that to just jot down all my notes, and I'm constantly doing that, assembly of those notes. And that reminds me, that's a constant reminder. A lot of people would say you have to get more organized. And I'd say that is my organization of going through those notes and making sure that the timing is correct. Again, the context is correct. Yeah. So that's kind of how I use the tools available to me. And for me now, that, I'm talking a lot as when I was doing, the 101 that I was a direct contributor, and now I'm trying to teach, my team and the same things that I've gone through. And I was mentioning earlier that, I look back over my career of many different companies, probably too many to go into, but I look back, it wasn't until maybe 20 years into the business that I took my first professional selling class. And it's like, how could you be in sales that many years and not take a professional selling class? It means that, and it was something that, I had to push for. It meant that the companies I worked for didn't value professional selling skills. And even since then, I've tried to bring that idea, and I've been a promoter of that, of bringing a Sandler or Sandler type system to everywhere I've gone to, because that's as important as product knowledge, as important as domain knowledge, as important as self knowledge. So the professional, you don't get away from professional selling skills unless you address your self knowledge issues.
Yeah, you've got to be humble enough to know that you don't know everything, and I think you've always had that, and it's such a valuable tool. Again, especially I think on longer sales and bigger capital equipment, and where there's a lot more things involved, because you just get less shots at it. You just get less opportunities. Therefore, you've got to make the most of them as much as you can, and you've done that in your career, without a doubt. I'll throw some kudos to your way. I mean, and we don't need to name names, but I know that not that long ago, you helped land a $20 million contract. I want to say it was somewhere in that range. And that took a long time. I remember talking you through that process and what you were working on. And so if people are taking things away, and I know that they are from this conversation, have a system, okay? Be patient. Don't miss steps is what I hear in you. Because if you miss a step, that's likely what's going to bite you in the tuchus at the worst possible time. And then on top of that, Brian, as I hear what you're going through, man, be a pro, study, learn, apply these tools and concepts, because they fit into a long sales cycle, but you probably got to shape them a little bit. You got to shape them a little bit for the circumstance, and you've done a phenomenal job of that, my friend. I got a list of notes right here of all the, probably got 10 things. Being curious, speed kills deals. Man, you got a lot of great stuff inside of your head that you're implementing and executing on long sales cycles. Any final thoughts that you got on your side, Brian, that would help good souls out there get better at this?
It's going to echo back what you just said, and maybe even soundboard it a little and bring some resonance to it. And that is everything that we do, we learn, sales is our craft, whether it's sales consulting, selling, sales mentoring, sales managing, sales is our craft. And it's, for me, it's the highest calling, right? Because you're looking at 100% for the client's best interest, 100%. And a lot of times he or she doesn't even know what their best self-interest is. I mean, that's why you're there, right? You're like the country doctor. Just hold on. We're going to check. We're going to find out if there's what's right and wrong. Then we're going to prescribe the best. And as such, it's a constant learning. And I can remember one of my favorite authors is Michael Lewis. He wrote The Blind Side. He wrote Moneyball, right? And it's the economics of things that you wouldn't understand. And it talks about biases. It talks about all kinds of different. And one of his more recent books was about the two social economists. And this is going to get way too long because I'm so passionate about this subject. But they wrote a paper called Prospect Theory, and it's about making decisions under risk in a risk environment. And when I read the book on these, the name of the authors was Kahneman and Tversky, and Kahneman's gone on to do great things. He wrote Thinking Fast, Thinking Slow, these types of things, these types of books. But in the book, it was talking about when you're working on very large projects, there's so much risk involved that the idea is just adding more people to the layer of the risk, more experts to the layer of the risk, doesn't actually improve or reduce the risk, because it doesn't remove the people out of it. It doesn't remove the biases. And they wrote a paper that was, a white paper that was 20 or 30 pages. It's become the number one cited paper in project management. And that was 30 or 40 years ago. That's not what it was an intent, but the intent, what it was is it was solely talking about people and people's natural bias. And when they're working on large projects with lots of risk, they're going to bias towards certain things. And as salespeople, we have to understand that. We have to uncover that. We have to either sell to that or make them realize it, that if they go that route, they're only shielding against risk, which are not happen. They could be putting a contingency against it. They could be making the wrong decision. They could be not moving forward. You see a lot of analysis by paralysis, and the money interests don't want to see that happen. So in other words, everything that we read, we learn helps us understand ourselves as people, helps us understand our customers, helps us to understand our clients, and helps us make sense of this silly, crazy, complicated world.
And it is a silly, crazy, complicated world, especially when it comes to these long sales. And you're right in terms of the biases for sure. And there's a lot of people involved and a lot of moving parts. And we just got to be better than everybody else when you're doing these. It's a different skill set. So, Brian, as always, I love talking with you. You're such a student of not just sales, but longer term projects, and such an all around great guy. And so glad to have you on the podcast. Thank you for sharing your wisdom and knowledge. I think I've got 18 or 20 concepts written down that I know others are going to have as well in terms of navigating these circumstances. So again, thank you so much for being here, and I appreciate it greatly, Brian.
Mark, thank you, and look forward to next time.
Indeed. We'll do it again.